When we think about DNA, it's usually in the context of like heredity and family trees, right?
Yeah, or maybe those crime dramas.
Exactly. But get ready to have your mind blown because today we're diving into the world of DNA, but not for the reasons you might think.
We're talking about using DNA to actually compute and store data.
It's wild. And the really cool part is we're not just speculating here. We're looking at a cutting-edge research review from Nature Reviews Chemistry.
Absolutely. This is like a compilation of the latest and greatest in the field.
So DNA computers, I gotta ask, how can DNA, like the stuff that makes up our genes, actually compute anything?
It's all about the elegance of how DNA is structured, those base pairs, A with T and C with G. Think of them as like a biological language, and like any language, it has its own set of rules.
Okay, so we have this biological language, but how do we go from that to, like, solving equations?
So scientists have figured out how to use those rules, how those base pairs fit together, to create logic circuits.
Logic circuits, like the ones in our computers and phones.
Exactly. But instead of silicon, we're talking about circuits built with DNA on a much, much smaller scale.
Okay, DNA circuits. I think I'm starting to get it, but how do they actually work? Is it like rearranging the DNA sequence itself?
You got it. Imagine a single strand of DNA acting like a key, fitting into a lock. It can actually come in and displace another strand that's already attached to a DNA complex, and this process is called toehold-mediated strand displacement. It's kind of like a zipper unzipping and then zipping up with a new strand.
So by controlling which strands interact, you're essentially creating a cascade of these reactions, like a chain reaction, making decisions at a molecular level.
Precisely.
It's like a microscopic ballet of molecules happening. This review seems to focus a lot on enzyme-free circuits. What's so special about them?
Great question. Enzymes are like tiny workers in our cells, but sometimes they can make mistakes.
So they're not perfect.
Exactly. But these enzyme-free circuits, they're incredibly stable because they rely purely on the natural attraction between those DNA base pairs, kind of like magnets.
So no more enzymatic errors.
You got it. That means they're much less prone to errors, which is incredibly important when we're talking about building reliable systems at such a small scale. We want those DNA computers to be predictable and accurate.
That makes sense. You wouldn't want your DNA computer crashing because an enzyme got a little too excited. So we've gone from DNA as the blueprint of life to these tiny, incredibly stable circuits. But this deep dive takes us even further down the rabbit hole. We're talking about DNA neural networks. Is that what it sounds like? Like, are we talking bio brains here?
Well, not quite brains in a jar, at least not yet. But we are entering the realm of, like, bio-inspired computing, you know?
So these DNA neural networks, they're taking inspiration from how our own brains work.
Exactly. Especially when it comes to pattern recognition. That's where these DNA networks really shine.
So, like, instead of our neurons firing, it's DNA strands interacting. I'm trying to picture this. What kind of patterns are we talking about at this molecular level?
Think about how we teach computers to recognize handwritten numbers. Those are visual patterns, right?
Yeah.
Now, imagine doing that with DNA, identifying patterns in genetic code, or even in the molecules floating around our cells.
Wow. So we could be using these networks to, like, diagnose diseases.
You got it. The review actually talks about that, using DNA networks for disease diagnostics. Imagine a tiny DNA network analyzing your blood sample for the unique DNA signature of a cancer cell.
It's like a microscopic detective on the case.
Exactly, sniffing out those telltale molecular patterns that might be missed by conventional methods.
And because DNA operates at such a small scale, these diagnostics could be incredibly sensitive.
And fast, too. Way faster than what we're used to.
Okay, so we've covered DNA as computers and even like artificial neural networks, but this review also dives into data storage, which, I don't know about you, but that feels a bit more relatable in my day-to-day life.
Oh, tell me about it. My phone storage is constantly full.
Right. We're generating data at an astronomical rate these days, and our good old-fashioned hard drives and the cloud, they're starting to struggle to keep up.
And that's where DNA's incredible density comes in. We're talking about the potential to store, get this, the entire Library of Congress on a speck of DNA, smaller than a grain of sand.
Wait, hold on. The entire Library of Congress, all those books and documents on something you could practically inhale. How?
It's like a super efficient coding system, you know? One way to think about it is using the sequence of DNA itself, those A, T, C, and Gs, to actually represent digital information. It's kind of like a really complex cipher.
So we're using DNA's 4-letter code to store all of human knowledge. That's kind of beautiful when you think about it.
It is pretty amazing. But there's another way too. It's called structural encoding, and it uses DNA's shape, its actual physical structure, to hold information.
So it's not just the sequence, but the actual, 3D configuration. That's mind-blowing.
Yeah, DNA is incredibly versatile like that.
But with all this talk about packing data onto DNA, how do we actually get the information back out when we need it? It's not like we can just, pull out our DNA reader and plug it in.
That's the million-dollar question. And the review gets into some really fascinating techniques for data retrieval and even error correction. Imagine designing a filing system so precise that you could find a single sentence within the entire Library of Congress.
But on a molecular level.
Exactly.
Honestly, my brain is having trouble keeping up with all this. It feels like we're talking science fiction, but this is real, actual research. So is this really happening? Are we going to, be running our phones on DNA one day?
Well, not quite yet. There are definitely some challenges to overcome.
What kind of challenges?
Speed and cost are big ones,
Yeah.
like synthesizing DNA, reading the data stored in it. It's still a bit slow and expensive,
Yeah, I imagine. So how do we make this, make DNA tech practical, for everyday use?
Oh, that's the exciting part. The progress is happening so rapidly. This review highlights some really creative solutions. One that really caught my eye is the use of tiny compartments. They call them proteinosomes.
Proteinosomes.
Yeah, they're like microscopic test tubes, and they can be used to carry out these DNA reactions much more efficiently.
Yeah.
Because you're basically allowing millions of these tiny reactions to happen at the same time.
Like a supercomputer, but the size of a...
The raindrop?
Yeah, a raindrop. That's incredible.
And think about it, our current data centers, they use a ton of energy.
Yeah.
DNA computing, it could be way more sustainable in the long run.
Wow. So not only could DNA change how our devices work, but also their environmental impact.
Absolutely. It really makes you appreciate the power of looking to nature for solutions to our technological challenges.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it, how far we've come from mapping the human genome to now potentially using DNA to power our digital world.
It's an exciting time to be following this field, that's for sure. And who knows what other breakthroughs are just around the corner.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive into the world of DNA computing and data storage. It's clear that this technology has the potential to completely revolutionize how we interact with information. If you're as fascinated by this as we are, we encourage you to check out the original Nature Reviews chemistry article. It's a really thought-provoking read.
It really is. Makes you think about the future in a whole new way.
It does. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the cutting edge of DNA technology. Until next time, keep those minds curious.